This is Dom Bettinelli, the CEO of SQPN, with a brief but very important message. For more than a decade, SQPN has produced the Catholic faith and pop culture podcasts that you love. We're a non-profit organization, so it's only your generosity that lets us carry out our mission. We haven't run a fundraiser in 2 years, and that's why we need to ask for your help right now. Please make a pledge of whatever amount you can afford to help us continue providing your favorite podcasts, as well as exciting new ones we have planned. To make your pledge and find out about the free thank you gifts we'd like to send you, visit sqpn.com/give. That's sqpn.com/give. Thank you for your generosity. May we hear from you today?
You're listening to Let's Talk, episode 25, brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network. Howdy all, welcome to Let's Talk, our weekly SQPN community podcast. Father Corey Stika here with you again to discuss issues of interest to our SQPN community. We've got a couple returning panelists this week. First, we got Steve Nelson is back. How's it going, Steve?
It's doing great. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you here again. You know, our last time you were on, our discussion about Blessed Stanley was pretty awesome. So it's good to have you back.
Oh, thank you.
And then Jimmy Aiken is also here. Of course, you hear Jimmy on many of our podcasts, but he's rejoining us again here on Let's Talk. How's it going, Jimmy?
It's going great. How are you doing, Father?
Doing well. It's cold and snowy here. Winter has set in. You know, that line from Game of Thrones, which I haven't watched, but you hear the line, winter is coming. Well, winter is here.
Yeah, we had the winter begin last night. It went from 65 to 20 this morning.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's brutal.
It's even cool here in San Diego.
What is that? 60? No.
I haven't checked, but I haven't had to turn on the heater yet this morning, although it's cool enough I might have to.
Yeah, that's one nice thing about San Diego, from what I understand, is it stays pretty temperate year round. It doesn't get too bitter, too hot, so
yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, you know, one thing we were discussing before the show here is that Steve is involved with the RCIA process in his parish, and we thought that would be a good topic of discussion, especially this time of year where a lot of parishes are really ramping up their RCIA program, their rite of Christian initiation of adult, the process by which the church invites people to come into the church to become, you know, those who are not baptized to become members of the church. And then by extension, a lot of times those who are baptized. How did you end up getting involved with RCIA, Steve?
Well, it sort of happened accidentally. There was a young man that came to our parish, and he's a college student here at Oklahoma State University. And he grew up in a non-denominational church, but basically Baptist in theology.
Okay.
And he has a friend that he went to high school with that is in RCIA down at Texas A&M University, and they had been doing a lot of talking. And he just showed up at the parish one day and said he was interested in learning more and wanted to become part of RCIA.
Oh, cool.
So the RCIA coordinator knew about my background working with college students, and she thought I would be a good sponsor. And so that's kind of how it all began. And it's we've been in it now about maybe a month.
Okay.
And it's been great. I enjoy college age adults are my favorite age range to work with, and just I like being around them.
That's awesome.
So it's been great for me to kind of re-energize myself and to think about the faith from a perspective of a convert, a potential convert.
Sure.
So it's been great. I've been loving every minute of it.
That's right. You know, Steve, you did college ministry at one point, didn't you?
Yes, I was.
I
was campus minister for the Diocese of Tulsa for almost 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a little while ago, but
that's got to take some energy though to work with that age group.
You know, you put a lot into it, but I got a lot out of it, and I would go back to that in a minute if I could do it.
Sure. Now, Jimmy, you've got a different experience of the RCIA process.
Yeah, I was on the receiving end of RCIA because I'm a convert. And so when I was in the process of becoming Catholic back in 1991 and 1992, I attended RCIA classes in Arkansas, and my experience wasn't that positive.
Mm-hmm.
This was in the days before the Catechism of the Catholic Church had been released, much less translated into English. And so there was an added freewheeling element that I suspect has been reduced as a result of the catechism and the ongoing stability that was in catechesis that was promoted by John Paul II and Benedict XVI. In my case, we had, I don't know, we were using initially a book called Christ Among Us, which later had the imprimatur stripped off of it. And so that was a flawed text to begin with. And I know there are lots of great RCIA programs out there. And so what I say is not to diss RCIA at all. It's actually to praise people like you and Steve, who are trying to give people a positive experience. And it's just kind of a reminder, I guess, of where we've been. But just speaking of my own experience, we had these, each session was kind of structured so that, we'd have an opening prayer, I guess, and then we'd have a segment they called Breaking Open the Word, where we took the scriptures of the day and were expected to give our thoughts about them as in little discussion groups. And so there'd be 6 people sitting around a table. Most people had, very little background in the Bible. And my thought was, shouldn't you be telling us about these scriptures and educating us about them instead of expecting us to come up with, well, this is meaningful to me because of X, Y, Z and stuff like that. Right. And I thought it was kind of reversing the teacher-student role. They also had some videos that they showed us, and that were like lectures by people on different aspects of the faith. Right. And my strongest memories of those, I remember a woman in one of the videos was giving a lecture on the Trinity, and she was explaining that the Trinity involves logic, which is a Greek thing, not a Hebrew thing. So the Hebrews didn't expect logic. And then I remember the video on confession, when they were teaching us about confession, and it was by a priest. And what he principally did in the video was recount an episode of Gunsmoke, where the old Western series with James Arnaz, where a guy a gunfighter ends up getting killed, but someone ends up getting killed and makes a sign of the cross in blood on somebody else's forehead as a sign of forgiveness. And that was our confession lesson, was this episode of Gunsmoke. It sounded like a really interesting episode of Gunsmoke. I probably would have rather watched that.
Exactly.
But I don't know that we actually learned that much about confession. So I kind of had to endure RCIA, but I gather that in most places it's much better, and certainly that it's much better today.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say
that it's come a long way since those days. I remember that book you were talking about, but yeah, we're very programmed. I mean, it's very well thought out. It involves our pastor intimately, all the deacons of the parish intimately.
Good. And
we're kind of surrounded, or it's kind of, the overall framework is based on this program that's out of Catholic Christian Outreach in Canada.
Interesting.
So they kind of use that as touch points throughout, but they're going through a much deeper catechesis than you would have had.
And unfortunately, the early 90s was kind of the end of what I jokingly call the butterflies and rainbows religious education. It was more about doing like for children's religious education, it was more about doing the banners of, butterflies and rainbows for First Communion than actually teaching about First Communion, so it's understandable, of course, that RCIA was loose. And looking at it back as a priest looking back, there really wasn't a lot taught about RCIA. When the RCIA book came out, the actual Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults, and I want to say it was mid 80s, I think, is when it first came in English. It was promulgated in the 70s, but it first came out in English and made official in the 80s. And I think it was just basically thrown at priests saying, you've got to do it this way. This is how you bring people into the church now. No more the instruction model you always hear, where people had a couple of instructions with the priest and then they went. And it's now you got to do it this way. Well, they weren't really taught well how to do it. And of course, that's a time when things were kind of loosey-goosey in the church anyways, as far as liturgy was concerned. So people just kind of did their own thing. And that's where you ended up with these programs like Jimmy talks about, where it was kind of whatever the teacher wanted to throw at. And then to add another layer on top of this, that idea you mentioned, Jimmy, about, reversing the teacher and student role, there really was a mindset that we have to lead people by experience. We have to help them experience the scriptures, not tell them what the scriptures say, but help them to experience the scriptures. Mm-hmm. Which then leads to what you have, Jimmy, where it's more of, oh, well, tell me what you think the scriptures say, instead of saying, this is a book written for a different culture at a different time. So we have to have that base understanding to know what it says versus, well, I think it says, well, that means you take it out of context usually. Yeah. Now, were you more of a biblical scholar then? Because I know you're very in depth in the scholarship of the Bible now, but were you then?
Well, obviously I was younger then, so I didn't know as much as I do now. But yes, I had been studying the Bible intensively for years because I had been planning on becoming a Protestant seminary professor. Mm. And so, not to be immodest, but my level of scripture knowledge would have been among the highest at whatever table of 6 people I was typically sitting at. And that meant that, it put me in a very uncomfortable position because I had the most knowledge and I was being asked to share, but I can't just dominate this conversation. Right. And if I tried to, I would be slapped down. Mm-hmm. So I was in the position of biting my tongue a lot and listening to, a lot of touchy-feely nonsense. Mm-hmm. And that was frankly uncomfortable for everybody.
Yeah. And that's the reason why, thanks be to God, I think most parishes, if not basically all of them, at least here in the United States, have gotten away from that model. And they're going to more of the traditional form of the rite of rite of Christian initiation. Of course, when we're talking RCIA, we've got 2 components. You've got the catechetical and you've got the liturgical. Right. And what everybody thinks of RCIA oftentimes really is the catechetical side of it, the classes. But it's
but there's all the other stuff. There's rite of election. There are the different scrutinies, which I didn't find particularly helpful, but they're in the rite, and then it all builds up to reception, typically at Easter Vigil. Yep. Although, interestingly, that's not actually what the national statutes for the catechumenate call for in the case of candidates.
Correct.
Which is something that this is something that I think still could be addressed, even though there's been lots of improvement in RCIA programs. One thing that I think could be better addressed is adapting it for the needs of the individual candidates for reception. Right. Because you have some people who are coming from backgrounds where they already have a ton of knowledge. There's not that much left to complete their knowledge of the Catholic faith. They still need, some time to settle in and some time to learn about what it's like to live as a Catholic. But they don't need the full course of instruction that someone who's walked off the street and doesn't know what God is needs. And so actually in the national statutes for the catechumenate that the U.S. bishops passed years ago, it actually says, don't give candidates the full course of instruction.
Right.
Just give them the amount that they need to complete their understanding of the Catholic faith, and give them a kind of, probationary is not really the right word, but, a time to settle in and get used to, make sure they're committed, and then receive them into the church, typically on a Sunday.
Right.
And instead, what happens in parishes is the parish staff, for whatever reason, and in many cases it may be due to not having enough parish staff, but the parish staff typically mainlines everybody through the full RCIA program, whether they're a catechumen who needs to be baptized and have a full course of instruction, or whether there's someone who's been living as a Christian for 50 years and just needs a little bit extra, and then be confirmed. And so everybody gets received at Easter Vigil, actually not what is recommended.
Right.
So I think there's still room for improvement there, but I'm so heartened that the experience overall has improved for people.
Well, absolutely. One thing you mentioned, Steve, and maybe this is a good time to kind of talk about what is the process of the RCIA program. Again, separating, can't really separate the two halves, but there is difference. Steve, you mentioned the rite of acceptance, and before the rite of acceptance, do you call those who are seeking the rite the inquiry?
Yeah, that's the term we're using, is just because nobody's made it. They haven't reached a decision point of any kind yet.
Correct.
So it's very open, and they're just inquirers. Yeah, and we're kind of doing. At least my approach with this young college student is a sort of a hybrid of what you were talking about, Jimmy, where we look at the topics that are going to be discussed, and we decide whether or not that's one he wants to attend or not. And they're being very flexible with that.
Awesome, very good. Yeah,
because he realizes the same thing. He doesn't need to sit through some basic scriptural, how the Bible came together kind of things when he already has an idea of that. So I think we're crafting an experience that's very unique for him.
Well, wow.
But we are doing, and the liturgical side is the stuff that I enjoy showing him the most because it's all new to him.
Right.
And we've taken tours of the church, and we've talked about the church, the liturgical year, and how all that's put together, and that's been really, those have been great discussions. But we are doing, it is sort of mainlining. Everybody's in considered part of one class, and this Sunday is the rite of acceptance, which was be the same for catechumens and candidates.
Right.
So it's a little bit of both. But that rite of acceptance is this Sunday, and that's the first decision point where they will say, do I want to continue or not?
Right. But it's so when you look at the actual rite, it lists 4 major phases in the process of becoming a Catholic. And the first phase is inquiry, being an inquirer, seeking it out. And that can go as long as you want. I've known people who've gone 2-3 years in the inquiry phase. And some parishes will do a kind of a regular meeting with inquirers. Sometimes it's just, meeting with catechists, meeting with volunteers, something like that. But at the rite of acceptance, they make that choice. I want to enter the church. I want to take this step. And that's where those who aren't baptized become catechumens. They are formally stating, I want to seek baptism next Easter or whenever. Ideally, the parish RCIA process is constantly ongoing, but at least here in the United States, most parishes, it's a school year thing. It's, from September to May or something like that, of course, whenever Easter is. But
a little bit after Easter for mystagogy.
Right. And that's the final step is after you've come into the church, you've been baptized or been accepted into the church. You go into this mystagogy, which ideally should be
that's
lifelong.
When we tell you
that's the rest of your life. But
that's when we tell you all the secret stuff.
Yep, that you get the secret handshake and the secret coin, and no.
Don't talk about the secret coin.
Oh, I wasn't supposed to mention that.
What coin?
Yeah,
coin?
exactly.
I must be missing something.
Yeah, exactly. You haven't quite come all the way in yet. No. But those who are baptized, we've mentioned this term before, candidate. A candidate is a person who's baptized, and that's actually more like the old model, where they could really, at the priest's discretion, could just go through separate instruction, kind of like what you're doing, Steve, and then just be brought into the church on a weekend. Usually they'll do it. A lot of parishes will pick a particular weekend, that maybe a feast day or something like that to do it on, but it can be any time. It wouldn't necessarily have to be part of Mass or anything like that.
And that's still, it's not just permitted, but encouraged by the statutes in the U.S. It's just not done that often.
Yeah. And I think, in larger parishes, not so much a parish like where I'm at, where I've got, 150 families and, not that large. It's a lot easier to do. We might have one or two people a year considering coming in. But I'm sure in a larger parish where you've got thousands of families or even, many hundreds of families, it is easier to just run them through the process.
One thing that we might want to mention is, so we've been using this difference in terminology between catechumens and candidates. Mm-hmm. And some people, look at that and they're not sure, well, why is there this distinction? Why is that a big deal? Why don't we just call them all one thing or the other? And the answer to that is because the church wants to dignify. So the traditional term for someone who's coming into the church who needs to be baptized is a catechumen. That comes to us from the early church. Mm-hmm. But today we have a lot of people who are already baptized, who are already full-fledged Christians, from other Christian communities that are becoming part of the Catholic Church. And the church doesn't want to put them in the same category as people who are not yet baptized, who are not, they may be Christian in belief, but sacramentally they're not yet Christians. And so that's why there's this other term. They're already Christians who are now candidates for coming into the Catholic Church, but we don't want to put them in the same category as catechumens, because we recognize not just that they're already intellectually Christians, but they're already sacramentally Christians. Correct. They've lived as Christians, and so that's why they're in a different category.
Right. And there's a rather lengthy list that the USCCB has produced that shows whether or not a particular church's baptism is valid or not. For example, of course, the Lutherans, the Baptists, things like that. Mm-hmm. But then there's things like Oneness Pentecostal. They don't believe in the Trinity, so their baptism not valid. Mormons, same kind of thing. Jehovah's Witness, same kind of thing. So if one of those members come to us, we have to admit them as catechumens, not candidates, because their baptism was not a valid sacramental baptism.
That's interesting. Did the Committee on Doctrine put that out?
I think so. I've always seen like a retyped copy of it, so I don't remember who put it out originally, but yeah.
I'd be curious in seeing that. I've been, and this was some years ago, but I've been involved in consultations on, well, how does this group do it, and is that going to count or not? Right. Yeah, for some kind of obscure groups. I've taken calls from a diocese about that. Yeah. So I'd be interested to see a list like that.
I'll find that list for you, because it's I think it's probably online. It might even be on the USCCB website, buried somewhere. Most stuff is on that website. But it's and of course you get some of these, the little Grandma Moses Bible Baptist Church and coffee shop on the street corner. Do they do it right? Do they do it? Do they do the Father, Son, Holy Spirit? You've got issues where I know of one Catholic diocese, the Diocese of Fargo. They actually had to go back through the records of a parish because the Catholic priest,
went off the rails.
He went off the rails and did Creator, Redeemer, and Sanctifier, which is not a valid baptism. So they had to go back, and that means then, well, do you repeat all the sacraments? Well, yeah,
you do.
You do. You have to go and redo confirmation. You might have to redo a wedding. In theory, I don't think in this particular case it happened. An ordination.
Wow.
In theory.
Good news. Good news is you don't have to redo the confessions, because if you haven't been baptized, that'll take care of all of them.
Exactly. And communion, well, you just received your first communion again. So I mean, these are issues that the church takes seriously, and that's why we have the RCIA process. We have this idea of, you take these steps coming into the church. We want to make sure if you're going to come into the church, you're doing so with, full will. You want to do it, and you're doing it. You're understanding what you're doing and why. And that's why we start with that inquiry phase. People can ask their questions, and you go to catechumen or candidate, where you learn what you need to know to be a Catholic.
So Father, Steve and I have talked a little bit about our experiences with RCIA, and you've talked about it from some of the more, theoretical, structural aspects. But what's your experience with RCIA been? Because you're kind of coming at it from a different angle than either Steve or I.
Well, I'm coming from it from two angles. When I was really actually about the time I was starting my discernment to the priesthood, I was a candidate for, or not a candidate, a sponsor for a catechumen. He had not been baptized. He actually grew up in a Catholic family, but for reasons of being a military brat and other things, he wasn't baptized. And so I sponsored him into the church and sponsored him through baptism. So I got to see it there. And I got to see a little bit of the, we want you to experience the scriptures. And we both kind of rolled our eyes and talked about it later. But then, of course, now as a priest, I've done it the other way, where I've been the one doing leading the rituals, leading the different rites that we do throughout the rite of acceptance, the scrutinies, the minor exorcisms. And yes, there are minor exorcisms as part of the rite of Christian initiation of adults. These aren't it's not the full exorcisms. There's not the spinning of the head or anything like that you see in the movies. They're like the ones at baptism. If you listen to the baptismal rite for infants, there is an exorcism where the priest calls that the power of the devil is cast out of this child that's about to be baptized.
And in the renewal of baptismal promises for the whole congregation at Easter, there's the, do you renounce Satan and all his empty promises and everything like that? And everybody in the congregation says, I do.
Yep.
That reminds me of a very funny scene in the movie Ed Wood, which is a bio. Yeah, it's by Tim Burton. It's a biopic of the famous bad film director Edward D. Wood Jr., who did Plan 9 from Outer Space, among other things. And it's a fascinating film. It's very well done. It is, and I like it. Or one of the things I like about it is that Ed Wood in this film is a symbol of everyone, because he's terrible at what he does, and his life is a wreck, and his friends are weirdos, and you get this incredible scene of brokenness. But he knows his mission in life is to make movies, and he's not going to let anything, not even his own incompetence, stop him from doing that to the best of his ability. And so it's like, that's kind of like all of us, even though we're all broken, as long as we recognize our mission in life, which is to serve God, and pursue it enthusiastically, our brokenness will not stand in the way of us doing something great for God. And so I have kind of a theological reading of that movie, but there's a moment where, in order to get fun, and this is actually true, this is from the life of the real film director. That he was trying to get money to make his most famous film, Plan 9 from Outer Space, and he approached a Baptist church in Hollywood and said, "Okay, what you do?" Because they wanted to make a bunch of movies like about the 12 apostles.
Oh, sure.
And he said, "Well, what you do is you make a film in a proven genre like science fiction that's going to be a moneymaker, and then you can fund your other films. So give me money to make Plan 9, and that'll bankroll your other films." And in order for them to agree to that, they wanted him and the rest of the film crew to get baptized in their church. and one of the film crew was Tor Johnson, this enormous Swedish wrestler. So they didn't have a baptismal tank big enough to fit, and so they used like a swimming pool in Hollywood. and in the movie, there's the scene where they're all getting baptized, and Bill Murray the comedian, is playing one of Ed Wood's friends, and he's playing a particularly dissipated character. And the Baptist preacher is about ready to baptize him and he's there in the choir robe down in the swimming pool. And he says, "Do you renounce Satan and all his empty promises and stuff?" And Bill Murray just thinks about it a second and says, "Sure."
I have a feeling I've probably had some people that I've baptized their kids, and that's kind of the response I've gotten. So no, not quite, but no, and that's one of the things that we do with RCIA though is this is a rejection of the world, this is a rejection of evil. It's rejection of sin. That's what it means to come into the church. I think we've forgotten that as Catholics sometimes, that being Catholic means we are rejecting the world. We are in the world, but not of the world. We like the goods of the world. We use the goods of the world, but ultimately our life is for God. Our life is for Christ. So that's what that whole process of the catechumenate is about, is to teach that, to show that, really more than anything else. Not, it should be. Again, these are ideals, but I've had the opportunity to walk with people through that, both as a sponsor and as a priest, and it's an incredible process when it's done properly. Jimmy can mention the example of what it looks like when it's not done properly, and it can be very painful when you're doing it that way. But when you do it right,
it's not the first time someone in the history of the world has had to suffer in order for a spiritual good to come out of the experience.
Exactly.
I think I was walking in some pretty big footsteps there.
Yeah, exactly. And compared to some of the suffering that's been going on, that's pretty minor.
Yeah.
Once we get to Lent, so the catechumen actually lasts for quite a while, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It goes until Lent. And then we have the rite of election, and that's the big one. That's the big step, at least ideally.
Yeah, and that one. So election in this case doesn't mean what we just went through as a nation a week or two ago.
Yeah.
Election. So the Greek word eklektos means to choose or chosen, and so at the rite of election, people who continue are referred to as the elect or the chosen after this rite.
Yeah, exactly. And this usually isn't done in the parish. Now, it can happen in rare circumstances, but usually it's done in the cathedral or in a place picked by the bishop. The bishop usually leads the rite of election. In my diocese, I think we have a couple of them. Traditionally, it's done the first Sunday of Lent. In my diocese, because of land-wise, we're such a large diocese geographically, that's impractical. So the bishop will do 2 or 3 of them.
And the way it was for me when I was coming in, it was done in my parish because, we were up in the Ozarks in the northwest corner of Arkansas, and the diocese is in Little Rock. That's 4 hours away.
Right.
And so we held rite of election in just in the local parish.
Right. And that's similar here. And it's something that it doesn't necessarily have to be done. I mean, none of this absolutely has to be done. You can cut corners, but that's never good. This process is there for a reason, and it's to help the people who are seeking to become Catholic know what it means to be Catholic. But at the rite of election, as Jimmy said, they go from being the catechumens to the elect. And this is actually something that's only done by catechumens. Candidates are not required to do the rite of election. They can go to it, but they will not actually become the elect.
Right.
It's only
it's like the elect or the chosen to enter the church through baptism.
Yeah, it's the election for baptism. And again, this isn't, the church doesn't stand up and vote yes or no. This isn't Survivor voting them off the island or something like that. This is, they have been chosen to, or they elected to become baptized.
And this is something that goes back to biblical times. I mean, the reason we're using the word elect is because it's used in the Bible, and it's used in the church fathers and so forth. it just happens to have this related word in English, election, that has come to mean something completely different. So It sounds weird to our English ears, but it's actually a very old term that goes back to the beginning of the church. Right.
And this is during the rite of election is when so much more is presented to these newly elect. And again, going back to the old church, and that, I think that's a good point to mention, is so much of what we do in the RCIA process today goes back to what the church did in her early years. At least they're based off of what the church did in her early years. But that was a different time. That was a time when the church had to be much more careful about who came in, because to find out that you were Christian could literally mean your life in many places.
Right. So they wanted to make sure that people were really serious about it. And that's why this is something a lot of people wonder about, because when you look in the New Testament, there's nothing like this lengthy period. And like when Philip is evangelizing in Acts chapter 8, and he runs across the Ethiopian eunuch who's reading the book of Isaiah, and he convinces him of Jesus as the Messiah, and the Ethiopian eunuch says, "Well, can I be baptized right now?" And Philip says, "Sure," and he baptizes him. And so people look at that and they say, "Why is there this much longer process today, and compared to what there was then?" And the experience of the church was that if you bring people in too quickly, it may not stick. That's something Jesus warns about in the parable of the sower, that some people believe immediately, but because they have no roots, their faith evaporates and they fall away. And so even though there could be experiences where it was appropriate to bring someone in quickly, there were a lot where it wasn't. And in particular, now one thing about the Ethiopian eunuch, he's also already believing in the God of Israel. He's reading the book of Isaiah, which he would have had to plunk down a huge amount of money for back then. Books were fantastically expensive. So he's already a committed guy, already knows about the God of Israel. He just needs to complete his knowledge. Whereas if you're bringing in someone who's a pagan, who has no knowledge of the God, of the true God, and you've got to teach him everything, that's going to take longer. And then when you add the persecution factor to it, that's gonna add further. And so that's how that situation developed. But it can be a little perplexing for some folks today. I remember I got an email once, this was years ago, from someone who had decided he wanted to become Catholic, and it was Holy Week, and he thought this would be a good time. It was like, well, yes, but maybe not this Holy Week.
And then sometimes that's a difficult discussion in our culture, because we want things now. If I want to become Catholic, I want to become Catholic now. Where's the paperwork? How do I get my envelopes? How do I do this? How do I do that? And it's kind of a difficult discussion. We need to take the time with this.
Yeah. Shouldn't I just be able to give you my email address and make up a password?
Right. Exactly. Now, Steve, have you been involved in the elect process at all yet, or are you still you're still kind of, I mean, obviously you're at the start of this process with this college student you're working with, but have you experienced any of the rite of election and anything beyond that?
Oh, yeah. This isn't the first time that I've been a sponsor, especially I've had some catechumens and some candidates over the years when I was campus minister.
Oh, sure.
So it's, I've been involved with it. And it's like you said, our bishop gathers everybody at the cathedral on one day. So all of the candidates and catechumens from across the diocese will be there on the same day. And it's great when you see the whole church filled with people like that.
That's impressive to see. That the diocese I was living at the time, before I entered the seminary, was small enough. It's the Diocese of Belleville, Illinois, for those who know where that is. It's southern quarter or so of Illinois. It's a big chunk of southern Illinois. They gather at the cathedral and do the one time. And it's impressive to see the cathedral filled with the soon-to-be elect and their sponsors and their families, and just people coming to to support those who are coming into the church. It's a very impressive process, and traditionally, or at least a lot of places, the bishop will meet with just the catechumen separately before Mass, so that they'll get a chance to meet the bishop, which for a lot of people in bigger dioceses is actually a fairly rare thing. You know, we're spoiled out here.
They're kind of surprised when they find out that the bishop glows.
Yeah, and floats. Yeah. No, he doesn't. Yeah. Most of them don't. Let's just put it that way. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an impressive process, and the rite of election itself is very impressive. But then things change, like I said. Then the steps that we go through change. Now we're starting to do more at Mass with the elect. Now we're starting to give the elect more. So they actually present to the elect both the Our Father and the Creed. Now, which sounds strange, because depending on the parish, they've already been saying the Our Father. They may even been saying the Creed along with the rest of us at Mass. But it's more. Yeah,
I know. This is one of the things. And at my parish, they've started doing the dismissal.
Right.
Of, the elect at a certain point in Mass. And that's all I understand. Okay. Yeah. That's based on ancient Christian practice, where you had what was called the Mass of the Catechumens, which was the part that everybody could come to.
Right.
It's essentially the Liturgy of the Word.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had the Mass of the Eucharist, which followed that. And in the early church, people who were not yet baptized were not allowed to be at that part of the service.
Right.
And so so you would take the catechumens out before the Liturgy of the Eucharist. And so they've tried in the post-Vatican II liturgical renewal, they've tried to retrieve that tradition.
Right.
As part of the rite of Christian initiation, but it doesn't make any sense, because today we don't kick people out,
right?
Unless you're one of these catechumens after the rite of election. But these same people have been sitting here for months, probably maybe years, seeing the entire Mass, and now they're being asked to go out for this formal reason that I don't think makes a lot of sense.
What's funny to me is up until the Mass changed in 1970, so like what we call the extraordinary form now, in the book it is still called the Liturgy of the Catechumen, the Liturgy of the Faithful. What we now they're direct parallels to what we now call Liturgy of the Word, Liturgy of the Eucharist. So Liturgy of the Catechumen is the Liturgy of the Word, Liturgy of the Faithful is the Liturgy of the Eucharist. And so at a time when they actually called it by those terms, they weren't sending people out at that point. One thing I do like bigger parishes a lot of times will do is when they do send them out after the homily, make them listen to the priest, and then they can go. Then they'll go do maybe some scripture study at that point. It's not like they just send them home.
No,
especially since
that's what we do in our parish.
Yeah, so they'll go and read the scripture of the day. So, somewhere around here, I've got a catechetical lectionary, they called it. And it's a book that it's got the readings and gives a little explanation, kind of a commentary on the scriptures of the day. And I think that's a good practice if we're going to do this idea that you stay for the word and then you leave before the actual Eucharist. Admittedly, as a priest, I'm not the biggest fan of it. Of course, I'm also in a parish where it would be very difficult to do, especially in my missions, because it's not like my catechists have another Mass to go to. When I'm in, Seco, my little mission parish east of here, their Mass is at noon, and it's the only Mass of the weekend there. They'd have to come to Malta, and that's, 30 mile each way. So that makes it a little more difficult. But of course, that's where you cater it to the parish's need. But it does allow for this idea of presenting these rites, these prayers to the person, so that and explaining them. And there's a whole ritual for that. As I said, there's anointings, there's the minor exorcisms. There's a lot more rituals that go on during this period again. And many of them, as you mentioned, Steve, the priest being involved, the deacons being involved. These are things that the priest and the deacon are called to do as part of the process. And they're actually quite beautiful when they're done well. This idea of, giving them the anointing of the oil of catechumens, that that OC, we see the oil, the bottle of oil with OC on it. That's the oil of catechumens. That's used during infant baptism. Well, it's also used during the rite of Christian initiation multiple times.
We don't give them salt anymore, though.
No, that can be done. That can be done. Yeah, the blessed salt. The old that was such a part of the conversion process in St. Augustine's day that he actually referred to it as a sacrament. Today we would call it a sacramental, but back then the term was used for both sacraments and sacramentals. Right.
But it was one of the examples he gave of the salt of the catechumens was one of the sacraments.
Right. Well, in the old rite of baptism for infants, again, before they were reformed after the Second Vatican Council, actually used to call for the priest to take a little pinch of salt and put it on the tongue of the infant. I'm sure the kid liked that.
Was that a bigger shock than the cold water?
yeah, exactly. Why is the baby crying?
It probably wouldn't be hard to administer the salt in that case, because back in the day they would dunk the infants, and so that'll really wake them up and get their mouth open.
Yeah, exactly. Crying and throw some salt in while you're at it. Well, finally kind of finishing up the process, we were going through this rite of election, and it's ramping up. And of course we're in Lent, so there's everything that's going on in the parish with Lent. And of course the elect are encouraged to be involved in that. And then we come to the big event, Easter Vigil. And one thing I think a lot of parishes try to do is encourage the elect to be involved in the entire Triduum, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Easter Vigil. But then at the Easter Vigil is when they're baptized. And that is that's a beautiful thing. I mean, it really is. A few years ago, again, I live in a small town. I'm in a small parish. We had from infant to adult, we had 10 people either being baptized and or being brought into the church. So we had them all lined up at the front of the altar there, and the whole ritual and everything is just amazing to be able to do that all at one shot.
Now, Father, normally in the Latin Church, it's the bishop who does confirmations.
Correct.
But ordinary priests like you can be given the faculty to do that.
Correct.
And one of the situations in canon law where the law itself gives them the faculty is if they're receiving an adult into full communion.
Correct.
With the church.
Correct.
And so does that mean that when in your parish, distant from the seat of the diocese, that when you're receiving people into the church, you not only get to receive them into the church, but also get to confirm them? Correct.
And this is part of the reason why I think a lot of priests prefer to do admittance into the church at the Easter Vigil, because if you're doing RCIA, you've got someone who's going to be baptized, you're already going to be doing the confirmation. You only have to ask for the permission once. But yes, it can be done at other times as well. It does need to be written permission from the bishop. And generally what the bishop will do, at least as far as the Easter Vigil is concerned, is their email will go out about middle of Lent. Hey, who do you have coming in? Let us know who you've got coming in, and we'll give you your faculties for that. It's done very pro forma. I mean, it's done, but it's done very simply. But yes, if I brought someone into the church this weekend, I could have asked for permission and received it, because that's basically expected. And it's one thing too, that when someone is baptized at the Easter Vigil, it is an expectation that they will be then immediately confirmed.
Right.
Which, of course, usually
and then given the Eucharist,
exactly.
So it's the Christian initiation grand slam.
Yep, exactly. They get all three one shot. Joke about they could do 4 of them if they want to do, like get their wedding vows convalidated or something like that, the same mass or something like that. 5 if you want to do sacrament of confession after, just for the sake of doing it. No, but it's expected. And so usually what you'll see is they'll do all the baptisms, and then they'll line up for the confirmations. And then, of course, they receive First Communion as normal. And it's really impressive when it's done well. I mean, it really is a beautiful, and that's why you hear of Easter Vigils that are 2.5, 3 hours long, because you've got all these baptisms and confirmations and everything else going on. but it is an impressive.
Yeah. You've also got a lot of extra prayers and readings at Easter Vigil.
Yeah, I am one of those priests. I do all 7 Old Testament readings. I don't cut it down. It's one time a year. Let's have a good mass.
I really like the Easter proclamation.
Oh yes.
Yeah. I always go to the Easter Vigil, even if I am not sponsoring somebody, just because I like all the ritual and I like all of that, and starting with the big bonfire out front. I love every bit of it.
Yeah. We got a nice little courtyard here between the church and the rectory, and so when the weather's nice, which unfortunately sometimes during Easter, it's not. This year we had to do it under our little overhang is where we had to do our bonfire. But we'll gather in the courtyard there and do the bonfire and everything, and then process into the church. And it's beautiful. I love it. I always love doing the bonfire. If nothing else, get a chance to play with fire. Oh.
That's the one issue I have with our cathedral is the front steps lead right down to the street, and there's nowhere so they have a little hibachi, and they're talking about the grand Easter bonfire, and it's a little hibachi, and it's that's disappointing.
Well, one year when I was in the Air Force, I was in Saudi Arabia for Easter. And on a base, so we had a chapel and everything. We had welfare officers, not chaplains, welfare officers, because of course you're not supposed to have Christians in Saudi Arabia. Well, they used like a little pie tin, the little aluminum pre-made pie tins with charcoal, and that was our Easter fire. It's like, wow, you do what you got to do. They couldn't have an actual open fire, so they squirted some alcohol on it, and that was our Easter fire. It was kind of disappointing, but it worked. It worked. But yeah, that's something, a whole nother topic of discussion, just the Easter celebration and the Easter Vigil. But that's the culmination of RCIA. That right there is what all of RCIA leads to, is that entering into baptism, receiving confirmation, receiving our Lord for the first time in communion. And at that point, you are fully member of the Catholic Church. You have been brought into the body of Christ. But it doesn't stop there, does it?
No, that's just the beginning of the Christian life.
Exactly. That's and unfortunately, there are some people that don't quite get that. But there is a final step that we call mystagogy. Now, Steve, what does your parish do for that point? Do you know? For the follow on after?
I don't know how our parish is going to do it. We're kind of a newly reconstituted parish with a new priest and a new church building and everything. So I'm not sure how we're going to do it.
That's be interesting to see. Yeah. Well, now, Jimmy, where does the word mystagogy come from? I know you would know this.
Yeah. So the first part of the word comes from from what you would expect, mystery. In Greek, it's mysterion, and in Greek, a mysterion could mean a number of different things, but it essentially was originally like a sacred oath, right. And it came then to refer to things that were under a sacred oath, like secret things, and the goge part of the word in mystagoge it comes from a root in Greek that means to lead. Right. The same like root as in pedagogy, to lead a child. And so mystagogy is to lead someone into the deeper mysteries that originally in the age of persecutions were only discussed openly after you had been baptized. This is something that was adopted as kind of a self-protection measure and also as a way of avoiding profanation based on Jesus's injunction, don't give what is holy to dogs, and don't cast your pearls before swine because they won't appreciate them. Well, a full understanding of like what the Eucharist is, it being Jesus himself, that makes it extremely precious. Right. And early Christians didn't want pagans mocking that. Sure. And they didn't want too much knowledge of some of these things being out there in the age of persecutions. And so they kept a lot of this within the community of the baptized, and some of it wouldn't then be taught until after you'd been baptized. Today, of course, we put it all up on the internet for everybody to read. It's right there on the Vatican website, everything except the secret coin.
Right.
And so we don't have that kind of practice, but that's where it came from. And so the idea is still preserved in the modern rite of Christian initiation as here's a time to go a little bit deeper and to reflect more, even though you know the basics, because they're supposed to have all been covered. We're going to reflect on them a little more and try to assimilate them a little more deeply.
Right. And the idea too, as it's presented today, isn't that it's not a specific period. Okay, so during the Easter season, we're going to do mystagogy and then you're done. It's something that all of us should be doing throughout our lives. Is we should always be going deeper in our faith. We should always be seeking to learn more, to grow, to develop in our understanding and our walk with Christ.
Further up, further in.
Exactly. So really all of us, if we are baptized Catholics, we are in the mystagogy. We should be doing mystagogy anyways, going deeper in our relationship. And that's discipleship. That's, ultimately what it means to be a disciple is to follow Christ and to grow in our relationship with him. So everyone listening, you're in mystagogy, the mystagogy phase. You need to be doing that. But so I think that's a good place to kind of wrap up this discussion. Unless, Steve, if you have anything more you want to say about RCIA?
Only that I'm privileged to be a part of it, and I'm real excited in sharing everything that's coming up with my candidate. I love every bit of it, and I hope I can share some of that excitement with him.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, it really is a wonderful thing to share that excitement, and to watch them as they grow in their faith, as they walk through the process. So this is a good time to wrap up the discussion, and I'll kind of turn the microphone over to Jimmy and let him kind of talk about our giving campaign. You've been hearing me talk about it over the last couple of weeks, and of course we had an episode discussing it, but Jimmy wants to discuss some more about it. So I'll pass the baton to you.
Yeah, so this is something that, listeners of this program, I'm sure, are familiar with, but we just wanted to re-stress once again. We're now about halfway through our giving campaign, and things have been going okay. We've been getting, response to the giving campaign, but we need to see more response. And so if you value the podcast that StarQuest does, if you believe in our mission of trying to reach people by engaging pop culture through a faith lens, then we really need to hear from you. We do have expenses that we have to cover, and because we've re-engaged our mission and produced all of these new podcasts, including the revived Let's Talk, Secrets of Star Trek, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, and all the other ones we're doing or have planned. We've undertaken significant financial commitments in order to be able to do that, and we need your help in order to meet those commitments. So the way that you can help is by becoming one of our Patreon supporters and helping us out every month. To do that, go to sqpn.com/give. Once again, that's sqpn.com/give, Give, and you can sign up right there, become one of our Patreon supporters, and we have a number of thank you gifts we'd like to send you based on your favorite SQPN podcasts. We have some gifts that are themed with Doctor Who, some that are themed with Star Trek, some that are themed with Mysterious World. And so you get your choice of the rewards that you would like. It's our way of giving back to you and saying thank you for enabling us to do the work that we need to be able to do in order to fulfill our mission. This is a serious thing. We haven't run a giving campaign in 2 years. So we really need to hear from you now because our funds are being depleted. And we have to steward these things wisely. One of the new podcasts we launched was a daily show called StarQuest Headlines. And in order to ensure that we're using your funds appropriately, we had to look at things and say, we're not at this point able to afford this kind of daily show. And so we had to pull it back to being weekly. And that's an illustration both of how serious we are about being wise stewards with your generosity, but also of the seriousness of the financial need, because we determined we couldn't at this time afford a daily show of that nature. And the same thing could be true of other podcasts in the future. If we don't see enough response, we won't be able to keep making podcasts at the rate we're doing them now. So it's very important that we hear from you. Once again, the way to give is just go to sqpn.com/give. Maybe you've helped us out in the past, and that's great. We thank you for that. Maybe we haven't heard from you in a while. This would be a great time to re-engage and help us out. Because we're a 501c3 organization, your gifts are tax deductible. That's something to bear in mind as we approach the end of the tax year. And so you can bolster your refund a little bit for next year. However you want to do it, please do contact us. And please, do it while you're thinking about it. I know myself, if I don't do things when I'm thinking about them, they can fall through the cracks, and I can have the best of intentions, but they don't end up coming off. So please, while you're thinking about it, go to sqpn.com/give and show your support today. And thank you so much in advance.
Oh, thank you, Jimmy. And it's been for me, it's been a pleasure to work with SQPN, getting Let's Talk going, working on Secrets of Star Trek, Secrets of Doctor Who, and I want to see this organization continue to succeed. So yeah, please do support us, and we do appreciate all the help that people have given us up to this point. Well, I think now would be a good time to do our picks of the week. So, Steve, do you have a pick for us this week?
I do. Since we've been talking about podcasts in general, I have one I'd like to give a shout out to. Mm-hmm. It's called Pastors of Payne, and that's Payne, as in Payne County, Oklahoma.
Nice.
We have two priests in this in our county, and they're both young, first-time pastors, and they're very energetic, and they have made it their goal to evangelize the entire county. And they do a weekly podcast called The Pastors of Payne, and they just talk about the church in Oklahoma. And, it's not deep theology, but it's a couple of young priests just talking about their ministry. And it's fun to listen to because they're a hoot.
I love the name of one of them, Father Brian O'Brien. You can't get much more Irish than that.
That's right. Yeah. He's the pastor of our parish, and he's fantastic.
Excellent.
It's almost a palindrome.
Yeah, almost.
It is.
How about you, Jimmy? What do you have for a pick this week?
So my pick this time is a book that I've been reading this week. It's called The Priestly Blessing, and it is by a priest named Stephen Rossetti, Rossetti. This book is one that deals with a subject that there's very little actually written about. There are not many resources that deal with the theology of blessings, exactly what they involve, what their history is. We have blessings happening all the time. I mean, at the end of every Mass, the priest blesses the congregation, and priest will bless rosaries and bless people, and they apparently get a lot of requests for a lot of different blessings, but there's very little that's discussed about that in seminary, I understand, and there's very little written about it in terms of the theology of blessings. So this is one of the few books that is out that deals with that. It just recently came out. Once again, it's called The Priestly Blessing, and it's by Stephen Rossetti.
Excellent. Yeah, people might have heard of Father Stephen Rossetti. He does a lot of work with psychology and things like that, but he also does a lot with the priesthood. So very interesting. I'm going to have to check it out.
Yeah, I was thinking you might be interested in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, we're told about, at least when I went through seminary, we were told about blessings and shown how to do blessings and things like that, and different blessings that we could do. But not a lot of the theology behind what it means to be a priest and to give a blessing. So I'm going to have to check that out. Very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
For my pick of the week, it's something that actually, we're about halfway through November by the time we publish this, about halfway through November, but I think it's something still worth doing. People are familiar with the No Shave November. A lot of guys do No Shave November. And of course, Jimmy and I are both very much non-shaven. We both have beards.
For me, every month is No Shave November.
And I haven't shaven since last November when I did No Shave November, but Steve is very plain faced. clean
cut.
Clean cut. But there's another layer that's being done with this. It's called the Nazarite Challenge. Now, when the word Nazarite, of course, I think our immediate thought is Nazareth. No, it's not becoming a member or living in the city of Nazareth. It's the Nazarite. Well, I'll read what it describes on the website itself. Lots of people think not shaving for the good of others is a recent trend. It's not. The Christian and Hebrew traditions are filled with men who set themselves apart by not shaving. Samson, Paul, and others lived as Nazarites, either temporarily or for their entire lives. Nazarites are men who set themselves apart and dedicate themselves to the Lord in three ways: abstaining, avoiding impurity, and not shaving. So the outward sign, of course, is the not shaving, but it's the outward sign is actually a deeper inward dedication. And what the Nazarite Challenge is doing, or Nazirite is actually probably a closer term. Jimmy, you might know better than me on that, but
that fuses a couple of different pronunciation schemes. But sure, the word in Hebrew is Nazir, which is also in modern Hebrew the word for monk. And the female equivalent, if I recall right, is Nazirah, and it's the word for nun in Hebrew.
There you go. So it, in a way, it's becoming I guess you could say it's kind of taking on a monastic life in our world. So with the Nazarite Challenge, and it started out, of course, just for men because it was the No Shave November, kind of giving a spiritual grounding, but they've also have a women's version of it, and they've changed it just a little bit for women that I think is actually appropriate to the spirit of it. So for the men, and they say there's 5 steps. First of all, you join a community. There's Facebook pages for both men and women. You commit to prayer, spending time in prayer each day for your own spiritual health, and then interceding for the spiritual and physical health of all men. Of course, there's stop shaving. You don't shave. You abstain and avoid. So you pick something that during November you give up: alcohol, video games, TV, whatever it might be. And then
alcohol would be or at least wine would be the traditional one. Correct. Because in the Bible, Nazarites didn't have anything to do with grapes.
Exactly. And then fifth of all, you share your faith. You go out and evangelize. Go share what you believe and why you believe it and why you're doing this challenge. So it's a great thing for women. I like the change that they made. Of course, women can't shave their face. So instead,
well, they can. It just won't change their appearance much.
Exactly. So instead, they say remove vanity. So give up something of your beauty regimen. So women give up some of their beauty regimen. If they're used to wearing, lipstick, maybe give that up. If they have a particular, manicure they like to do, or nail polish or something like that they give up, just something as a way to remove a little bit of that vanity that, of course we all have, not just women. Men can be vain too. And we can and are vain, I should say, most of us. So it's a great thing. And I know, like I said, we're halfway through November, but it's something that you can still do. And it doesn't have to end at the end of November either. This is something you can continue on into Advent, because, of course, right after November, we move into the season of Advent, preparation for Christmas. So, again, my pick is the Nazarite Challenge, and I'll have a link to that in the show notes. Make sure that gets done there.
I have a question.
Sure.
Is there a particular reason why it's November? Is there something scriptural with that?
No, there's the No Shave November came about as kind of a charity fundraiser type of thing, and of course, you get that alliteration: no shave, no November, no shave November, and it was kind of a play on words. It started secular. It wasn't a religious thing. And the Nazarite Challenge just takes that and adds a religious component to it, adds a faith component to it.
Okay, I get it.
And you can also work on your novel at the same time, since November is also NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month.
Oh, yeah.
People like using those puns off of November. So, well, thank you both for coming. Glad you could join us. Steve, where could people find you if they want to hear what you have to say?
I still have a blog. It's a little dormant, but I have plans for it.
That's a good thing.
Everything Esteban. So STEBAN.com. Everythingesteban.com.
Excellent.
And on Twitter, it's Steve_Nelson. Very simple.
That's the easy one. Jimmy, where can people find you?
They can go to jimmyakin.com. That's JIMMYAKIN.com.
Oh, very good. And once again, Father Corey Stika, you can find me at my website where I post my homilies, frcorey.org, on Facebook at Father Corey Stika, Twitter is FR Corey Stika, and you can send us feedback here at Let's Talk at SQPN.com. And once again, please do check out our giving campaign, SQPN.com/give. Thank you all very much for listening, and God bless.
This is Don Bettinelli again. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast and that you'll help us keep producing the podcast you love. Thank you for your generosity. To make your pledge and find out about the free thank you gifts we'd like to send you, visit sqpn.com/give. That's sqpn.com/give.